I have my tweet all ready to go. So on top of it. All right. Hi, everyone. So we are live for our final book discussion, but it is not going to be the last time we talk about the Fairyland books. But just feel free to say hi in the comments. We're going to give it a couple minutes and then we'll jump in. I'm really excited to talk about this one.
I am too.
I can't wait.
Very curious to see how you felt about it.
Okay. Oh, and I already linked Mari in the description box. I think probably if people are watching this one, they've seen some of the others, but we can still do like a little introduction.
Sure.
Yeah. So do you want to go ahead and start us off? Just like introduce yourself, and then I'll talk a little bit about the overall project, just as people kind of trickle in. So
sure.
Go ahead.
So, hello, everyone. My name is Marines. And my channel name is Marines. You can find me here on YouTube and also a lot on TikTok, where I do primarily book reviews, but I also just talk about media in general, media analysis, media literacy, etc. And the Fairyland series is one of my favorite series of all time.
Yes, she's our resident expert. I have never read the series before, so this is my first time. Hello, Hannah. I'm also so glad you could make it live. I know Hannah's been reading along with us. Hello, Amy. Yeah, so this is our final book discussions for The Girl Who Raced Fairyland All the Way Home, which is the 5th and final Fairyland book. We are going to have a kind of whole series wrap-up fun chat kind of discussion, which is going to be on Mari's channel, and we have tentatively scheduled that for Sunday, May 7th. So this coming Sunday, or next Sunday at 4 p.m. Pacific time, 7 p.m. Eastern. That's what we're thinking right now, but if that changes, we'll of course let you know. And we are going to get into some like overall series thoughts, I think, because we are talking about the last book in the series, but I'm kind of thinking that one is going to be just like whatever we want to talk about with the whole series, and maybe some like fun like questions, like favorite moments, that kind of thing. So it'll be a good time. And yeah, so this is the kind of, I guess, culmination of the first part of the Not a Genre Book Club, which is something I set up after thinking about it for a long time, because I have like big feelings about the importance of adults reading middle grade and young adult books and discussing them as literature, because they are. And so I wanted to like theme a whole book club around that. So this has been our first series, and as I suspected, it is an excellent one to start this project, because there's so many great themes and characters to dig into. So with that segue, let's go ahead and jump in, start talking about the book. Like we always kind of start off with like overall thoughts. So Mari, I know you have read this series several times before. So if you want to talk about how you feel about this book and it as like a series ender, and also any like insight you can give us based on rereading it.
Yeah. So when I actually read the first book in the series, I think all of them were out except for this last one. So I read through the series before the last one came out. And then I got the last one, and it took me a while to actually read it because I loved the series so much that the idea of it ending was like super sad to me, but also like you put so much, I don't know, so many expectations on the final book in a series that I was like, I don't want this to let me down. So I think I read through 1 through 4 like 1 or 2 more times before I actually ever picked up like the last book in the series. But I have now read it. I think this is the 3rd time that I have read the final book, and I really, really love it as a series ender. I think that this is just it feels like fan service, but not in like a derogatory way.
Yeah.
Like she brought back all of the moments that would be important to readers. It feels like it really closed off a lot of the threads that I wanted it to. And while it was not necessarily the ending for September, I think I was hoping for, it is an ending that makes so much sense. Like I did not think about this as a possibility, the way that she ended
Yeah.
this book. But when it happened, I was like, oh, duh. Like, yeah, that makes
Yeah.
complete sense. So it was super satisfying, but not entirely predictable. So overall, part of the reason that this like series lives so strongly for me and my memory and my feelings is because it's complete, it's beautiful, it's consistent throughout, and it really, I think, starts strong and ends strong in a way that you don't always get with series, right? You've got some variety in terms of quality, but I think this one just like hangs on to it the whole time. So
Yeah. So as I said, this is my first time reading the series, and I really had no idea what to expect from the final book, except that we talked about this, I think, last time. Like, I trust Catherine M. Valente as an author. So I didn't know what would happen, but I felt pretty confident that it would feel right. And it does. I loved this book. This is my favorite in the whole series. Like, it just like really landed for me in my feelings and in like what I think it does for the whole series. I think, as you were saying, Muddy, I feel like she brought back elements from the other books, and I feel like this book, like, it takes everything that Valenti does really well and it does it like even better. Like, that's how I feel about it, is like these like character moments and like the growth that we see from them, the themes and the things that this book says about like love and friendship and storytelling. Like, I thought this was fantastic. I think this is like one of the best series enders I've read. Certainly recently. Like, it just came together so beautifully, and I think this is like such a good example of how you can have a satisfying series ending that still has changes and like development and, you know, giving certain things up, and it still feels satisfying for the reader. So yeah, this was an easy 5 stars for me. I absolutely loved it.
yay.
Yeah, so I love that we're finishing so strong. This was like, I think it's funny too, because like I think there's been at least 2 times before where I'm like, this is my current favorite, and now we get to the last one and I'm like, no, this one is my favorite.
I think in terms of favorites, we'll probably on our show next week, we'll probably, after this settles too, we can rank them. It's really difficult for me because since I'm a rereader, that like I kept going back to one and rereading and back to one. Like, I've read the first book the most amount of times, and then the second book the second most amount of times, and so on. So like compared to the first book, which I've read too many times to count, I've read this one 3 times. A humble 3. So it's always really difficult for me to like think of like favorites or whatnot. So I'll be very curious next week to hear your ranking as somebody who has experienced them all once and sort of like equally, like, you know, where that puts them.
Yeah. And I am also somebody who loves to reread. And so especially as I was reading this last book, I'm like, oh, this is gonna be so good on reread. Like, it made me want to like pick up the first book immediately, and I'm like, Kara, you have other things you have to read right now. But yeah, I can't wait to return to this series. And yeah, so let's just talk about September, our best girl.
Our best girl.
She is 17 by this point. Yeah, so how do you think September has changed over the course of the series? Like, besides the obvious of like she is older, but like what do you think we see from her in this last book that is different?
All different in terms of this is that am I freezing? I don't know.
Yeah, we just had like a second of freezing.
Okay.
I think we're good now.
Okay. One of my favorite things about this as a series ender is that September still feels so true to herself. And like the girl who stepped on like the shore of Fairyland in the first book still feels very much like the September that we get now, in a way that feels like such great character growth, right? And everything that we learned about, I kept thinking about too, especially in the scene where they're dueling and it's like insults or whatnot. Yes. And she's like, I literally can't insult anybody. That felt like character growth to me, in the same way that like they had to tap into like younger Saturday nowadays in order to do it. Like there's like a meanness to younger children that
Yeah.
you kind of grow out of. So seeing September saying like, I can't do this, felt like, I don't know, I feel like 12-year-old September could have done it
Yes.
in a way that 17-year-old September can't. So it was more moments like this where I was like, I don't know, like when you were 12, maybe this would have been different, but like at 17, you've definitely like seen and experienced the growth there. And I just
Yeah.
thought that was such a sweet way to like send off her character, is to like,
Yeah.
she's still herself, but we have definitely seen the way that she has changed throughout.
Yes. And I think Valenti hit that balance perfectly, because you don't want a character to feel unrecognizable,
Right.
but you want to see them grow and change and, become better. Yeah, kind of going along with that, I feel like we're introduced to her as like being a little bit heartless.
Yes.
And by the end of this series, she is absolutely not. Like she has like, I feel like we've been watching her just like gradually bring more and more people into her heart. And by the end of the series, it's like everyone in the world is like in her heart. And I just think that is so beautiful without being like, I don't feel like it comes across as sappy at any point, because she's so genuine. And the series is so genuine. So yeah, I feel like we have, like, September is still so brave and clever
Yes.
and, spunky, but she has a lot more, I think, empathy now. And that has changed the way that she does things.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I think it was really beautifully done.
I I love that you know, the entire like trope, I guess, of like love is the answer, right? That can
Mhm.
feel very cheap or really sappy when especially like at the culmination of like a big battle. If you get to a point where it's like love is the answer,
Yeah.
it feels so unsatisfying. But I thought that it was the opposite here, particularly because I think it was so smart to like almost the first thing that we hear about September is that she's heartless. So to bring us to book 5, where it's like a race to find Fairyland's heart, I think
Yes.
it's just so smart, especially as you learn piece by piece, like, okay, the heart is in the story, the heart isn't sacrificing yourself for others or whatnot. Like it felt true to what Valenti set up in book 1 to come to this moment that was like, it was love all along. I was like,
Yes.
I buy it. You can do that. Like,
Yes. Yeah, it felt so earned, because September at the beginning of the series would not have done that, would not have experienced it in the same way. So it was the result of a lot of character growth, rather than just kind of, oh, I don't know how to get them out of this situation, so they're just gonna love.
yes.
Amy says, cannot rank the books. I refuse. That's fair. Can't wait to pick up all the foreshadowing bits on reread. Yes, I'm so excited to return to these. Um, and yeah, kind of speaking of memory, I guess, or revisiting, Saturday. Saturday's role in this book is very sad in some ways, for part of it. And I feel like, in a way, because of what happened to him, he wasn't as active a part in the story, for like understandable reasons. But I wanted to ask, like, what you think, like, him losing his memories throughout the story is like heartbreaking, but also if you think there was, I don't know, any kind of like storytelling or thematic connections with that, or
I
anything that it kind of made you think of, like, in the novel.
Yeah. So, well, two things I was thinking of while like reading his parts, not only Saturday's parts, but I loved how we got like little side quests with A through L, with Saturday, and with Blunderbuss, I think as well, like did a duel or whatnot, where it character and their strengths and like
Mm-hmm.
be in their home as well. Sorry, I saw that it was glitchy again.
Yeah, no, it's very intermittent. Sorry.
It's okay. So we got to be in their home. We got to see their strengths. And so like the focus was on them. So even though Saturday was like a little bit more removed after the part where we headed to the sea, I loved that we got that moment in the sea, right? And that
Yeah.
he had his moment to shine. The thing that the memories reminded me of was actually A through L getting smaller, and how like his
Mm-hmm.
his size was like a thing of like a moment of pride for him. And so he had the part in the series where he was getting smaller and smaller and had to kind of learn how to lean on September for that part. And they reference it here too,
Yes.
where he's like, where September's like, well, if you're a steed, I'm a steed because you've carried me and I've carried you. And I was just like, stop it. So,
Yeah.
Saturday's like movement through time has always been like the defining thing about his character, right? That he's holding all of these timelines at once within himself. He's holding these like mixed up memories within himself. So I thought that it was like paralleling that arc for A through L, where he was getting
Yep.
smaller, where we also see Saturday like losing his memories, right? And having
Yep.
to rely on his, on September and his group of friends. So that was like mainly what it made me think of.
Yeah, and I think it says some interesting things about identity and how that is related to memories, because we have those moments where Saturday doesn't feel like himself
Yeah.
because he has forgotten these hugely important moments in his life, like being locked up by the Marquess and I mean basically any of the adventures that he's had with September and everyone else. And I just think it's such an interesting look at like how experiences shape you, like in very noticeable ways, like because we see when he has those things removed, he's not the same person. And on the one hand, it's like, it would be nice if he actually hadn't been locked up by the Marquess, if we could go
Yeah.
back in time and change that. But there's also, I think, a part of us that misses old Saturday, because he has, not that it's worth it what happened to him, but because some things have happened to him, it has made him a kinder and more observant person. It kind of reminds me of in the second book where we see Saturday's shadow and how different he is. And it's like, it's still Saturday, but it's also not. I think was that his shadow, or was it like
Yes, his shadow in the
okay.
second.
I was pretty sure it was shadows, but
Yeah.
yeah. And I like that you brought up Elle as well, because I think, yeah, in a way, this novel, Elle has a more like a place that he's more used to, because he's like the big dragon who can like protect everyone. But I wondered if you had any thoughts on how Elle kind of like played into this book, because it is in a way a ensemble story among them.
Yes.
But September is still very much like the head of it, which I'll have some questions about. But anyway, thoughts on A through L.
So before we go there, I just wanted to add a little more about Saturday, because something you said made me think of, thinking through Saturday, like losing part of himself because his memories are gone and losing the experiences that shaped him also feels like a foil for how much we notice how September has changed and how those experiences have shaped her. Right. And like thinking about, the hard times that she went through, but also thinking like, okay, her mom has a few moments too where she's like, has September done terrible things? And like, I barely recognized you, my brave girl. And so like thinking about all of the hard things that she did go through, but recognizing that that's kind of how we got to where we got. So having September going the opposite, or Saturday going kind of the opposite way that like we're thinking about September, I think was really neat to really highlight. So
yeah, I agree.
As for A through L, I think speaking of like, because it is an ensemble sort of thing, and like I said, every character does really get their like moment in the spotlight, which was really wonderful, but we are spending a lot of time like spread out a lot amongst a lot of different characters and places. A through L feels like he's got a little bit of like a background role in this as well, but also because I think that A through L has done a lot of like growing up also, like in other books, right? Like he's had other books where he's gone through like what Saturday was going through or whatnot. So that was neat. But I will say I love this ending for A through L. I love it so much. I love King Consort A through L.
I did not see that coming. It makes me think a little bit of like Shrek with like the donkey and the dragon, but like less weird. Yeah, and I loved the like Aetherell and Blunderbuss reading Agatha Christie, and they're like, "This is how we're gonna save Fairyland," and he like makes a mustache, and he's wearing like a turnip, and September is like, "I can't tell him, like I can't tell him it's not really a turnip," like. That was just, we had some really lovely moments that were just like wacky and fun in
Yes.
between all of the really emotional stuff, which I think was a great balance.
I think that that's kind of what I felt in terms of, like, maybe saying his background wasn't correct, but he got a lot of like the comic relief in this, and like
Yes.
a little less of the serious stuff. So that was neat to see,
Yeah.
him in that role, and then end it on such a high that he's like, well, guess I'm king now.
Yeah, and he just like September wakes up from essentially being dead, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I guess I'm like sort of the king, but it's fine. How are you doing?" Like,
yeah. Welcome back.
Yeah, very offhand. Speaking of Blunderbuss, unapologetically my favorite, or one of my favorites. Did you have anything specific about her? I just basically, I loved every single scene she's in. Every line out of her mouth makes me laugh. Like, but she's also like she is very funny, and she does have a lot of the comic relief moments. But I think that she also can be very genuine and very caring, and it's like the way that she cares is very aggressive.
Yes.
But she does love everyone so much, and I just loved it. And it just kept reminding me of my cat Nala, because she also bites to show she's happy. She bites to show that she's like sleepy. Like, she's just, yeah. So Blunderbuss, the combat wombat.
Yes.
Anyone have thoughts?
Just so unapologetically herself. Yes. In a way that also I think is an amazing foil, especially because she comes in late as a character, right? Yes. That we don't necessarily like have an arc for Blunderbuss, but I think that that's what makes her just so, the fact that she's so like brash and unapologetic about who she is, I think it fits really well, because we didn't really have time to spend like watching her go through, like the other characters. I will say that like when I didn't actually remember fully like how the changeling thing ended, because Tom or Hawthorne and Tam like were in the race as well, and they're like, well, we want a soul, right? And I had like a little bit of a sense of injustice over that too. Like, I had a similar reaction to September, where she's like, we it all sucks, like we've all been through this, and they're like, no, but us. And so her like sense of like, everybody goes through this, everybody feels wrong in their lives sometimes, kind of thing. I was like, yeah, you tell them. But the fact that it ends up being Blunderbuss on the throne, I was like, best outcome. If it can't be September, or it's not going to be September, you had to put somebody there that was so wonderful that everybody would go, oh, like, okay.
Yes. Yeah, good Queen Bus. Like, I lost it. I thought that was like the funniest. Like, oh my god, yeah, Queen Blunderbuss for life. I love her so much. Yeah, and she did come in so late in the series. Like, we only meet her near the end of the fourth book, and yet she like looms so large in my feelings about this series. Like,
yes,
good Queen Bus, love her. Mm-hmm. And yeah, do we want to talk a little bit more about Hawthorne and Tam? And we only really see them tangentially in this book, which makes sense because the last book was all about them. Yes. But I also felt a little bit of that sense of injustice, although it was also partly like that they were competing in the race. And I'm like, this totally makes sense, but also, how could you do this to September? Like,
and I get it. Like, they felt their own sense of injustice because of how they were treated by Fairyland, right? And they still had all of that, like, anger essentially at like having to grow up in a world that wasn't their own. So I was like, I get you, but also you just got here. Like,
September has put in the work. Like, she has been here.
it was really funny though, because they're like, everybody just kept showing up and she's like, you too? And they're like, yeah, like we just got a race. So I get like
Yeah.
her own sense of like, this sucks. I felt it also. I was like, yeah,
Yeah.
I get
Like
it.
it was so relatable of September to react the way she did, because like when Tam and Hawthorne, they're like, well, you just said you don't even want to be queen. And she's like, well, yeah, but I don't want someone else to be. And I'm like, exactly. Like, it makes no sense, but I'm like, I feel this so deeply. Like,
Yes, because I mean, I kept thinking about, and I don't even know where I heard this, but it was like a few election cycles ago, where I heard somebody, people were saying, well, this person could run and this person could run. And the commentator basically said, anybody who you think would genuinely do a good job at being the president would never run for the president. See, like anybody who like actually be good at that job would be like, I would never want that job. And that I always think about that as we go through election cycles. But that's how I felt about September. It's like she would genuinely, I think, be a very good queen, but also all of the characteristics that would make her one are also what she's like, I could not do that job. So watching her like flip-flop between those two sentiments of like, I want to say no, but I don't want you to say no to me, like that kind of whole thing, I thought was incredibly relatable. And I think that she nailed it in terms of her own feelings of like, well, I don't really want to be queen, but I think I would be good at it. And it can't be anybody like worse than me. So I have to do this. Like that whole cycle. I just loved it so much.
Yeah. I loved it as well. So kind of speaking of some of these like side characters returning, we had quite a lot of that in this book. A lot of like full circle moments.
Yes.
We had the Marquess, we had Halloween, we had Lai come back. That got me like in my feelings.
Yes.
So I wanted to talk a little bit about like how those moments like functioned in the story, because you mentioned already, it's like fan service, but in like the absolute best way. So if you think there was anything else that Valenti was doing with that, and also was there any like character or moment that you wish we got a call back to but we didn't?
I think that what its function in this, if you think about like the big moral of the story or one of the major themes of like September's sort of heart for Fairyland. And like you said earlier, like at the end of this, she kind of has a whole world in her heart. It's kind of like the thing. I think that bringing these characters back really like feeds into this idea of, again, September would be a great queen just because every person that she met, she treated in such a like fair and empathetic way. Even when she was making mistakes, even when she was angry or whatever, she's collected this like, she has this collection of people and places that she's experienced during her time in Fairyland. And I think that like going through a tour of that, not only sort of physically and taking another like grand adventure, but like bringing back all of these characters was just wonderful for the last book. It highlights all of her growth. It highlights like everything we've been through throughout the books. So I think it was like very neat callbacks for us, but also it's just pointing all of these sort of arrows at like, see how much she's grown, see how much she's done, like see all these people and experiences that she's collected. So I thought that was really neat.
Yes. And I think it also says like it makes the story feel so lived in and so real, and I think it fits in with what we get a couple times in this book from the narrator about like endings don't really exist, you just stop talking. And I think that fits so well with like seeing these characters come back, and especially the decision to have some of the antagonists come back, but in ways that I think didn't overshadow the rest of the story, but that also made sense. And I really love that even the characters you only see for a little bit, like September treats them like real people, and because of that the reader sees them as real people, like I just thought that was so good.
Who was missing that you like, or like, I want to see them again?
Okay, the only where's my book cover? Okay, I got excited because I thought we were going to get Aubergine the Night Dodo again. But other than that, it was like flawless. Like I was a little bit kind of hoping for Aubergine, and I still think that it's in like the circus scene, like the sonnet characters and like the poetry ones, like they were great and I would have loved to see more of them, but like I understand they were just kind of a fun little one-off side quest. The one that I was like, excuse me, she's on the cover, was Aubergine.
We do, I think, I don't know if that now I can't remember, and you'll excuse me because I read this a little bit, but the whole like the dodo's egg is like a huge thing here because that's what brings everybody back. So maybe it's just a dodo that's on the cover, and
yes, like maybe
the dodo.
The dodo who won the hello, welcome. Amy says, I love the competitors that were so blasé about it. Like, why not try it being the ruler? Yeah, like there were some of them where they're like, I'm not busy. I guess I could like try to rule Fairyland. Let's see what happens.
And I think that was why September was like, well, like I have to do this. Like, no, I don't want to be queen, but look at these guys. They don't even like, you're just like, this is a game. It's not a game. Like,
yeah. And I love like just getting to see glimpses of these different rulers and how some of them were so funny or interesting or like terrifying. And I think one of the ones that like cracked me up the most, just because it felt so, the way he was introduced was always so bizarre, was Hush Now, the ancient and demented Raven Lord. And it's like he was always like, his full title was used like every time, and that just like I couldn't get over that. I thought that was so funny. Like
I love the scene that it was like the club of like once in future or whatever, and September explains voting, and they're all like, oh,
they're like, that sounds horrifying, and it's like there's some issues with it. Yeah.
Oh, and it's so great because she's trying to explain to them why this is horrifying for her, and she's like, we are voting, and they're like, oh, never.
Which is another thing that like adult readers are gonna be like, oh boy, like I feel you. And I'm sure kids would understand the concept, but it's just, I feel like it's another great example of like, these books can be for everyone. Like, do you want some biting social commentary about democracy? Like, because here we go.
The way that Valenti like puts in like these weird little like just weird commentary on whatever like system or whatever, like travel, the post office, voting,
taxes,
taxes, money, currency. She's just every thought she's ever had about the silliness of like adult existence. She's just like, I'm gonna make this a ridiculous thing in this book in a way that is just like, you're right, and also hilarious. And I love the way that comes back too in, we started talking about Hawthorne and Tam, but I think that the like big Hawthorne moment for me is when he breaks the pencil and like all of those rules that I absolutely love from book 4 like kind of come back in a way that is really, really satisfying, and that like matches with that theme of like sort of how if Fairyland is its own sort of like ridiculous, so is the human world. It's got its own set of ridiculous rules as well. So I loved that coming back in the end.
Yes, I loved that moment. I did not anticipate anything around that happening, but it was so satisfying, and just what a great reveal. We talked a little bit about this in connection with some of our main characters, but one thing that I really, really loved about this book is September is supported and helped by her friends and by her allies and by people she meets, but she's also a very active participant in what she's doing. Like, she does have help in some of the duels, which she gets in trouble for. I thought that was hilarious when she's like, how did you know I'd end up in the penalty box? And Lai is like, honey, like, you break rules every time you like pop up. But I really, really love that like it still feels like September is still the main character in her story, and she is making decisions, and like she's not weak for needing help, but then there are also times where she's like, okay, this is something I have to do myself. Like I love that. I think that's a hard balance to get right. But I thought she did a great job with that. So I don't know if you had any thoughts on that kind of focus, or like how the responsibilities were distributed among the group. But
I did like that she had helped, and I think I mentioned it in the sort of from the point of view of like each character having their moment. I thought, but also like yes to what you're saying in terms of like this has always been a really great balance between sort of like the whole group doing things together and each person contributing their strengths, but
yes,
those moments where September has to go alone and do things on her own or whatnot. So I think that all that also is like captured in this last book. The moment I think that stands out to me in terms of that is when she's first crowned queen, and like she's terrified. All of these people are surrounding her, and she's like, "Well, a queen does what she wants." So, and she just goes for it. She jumps in and she like starts queening immediately
yes,
in a way that I was like, "Oh my god, good for her." But we also see a little bit of that heartbreak of like everybody goes away and they're all like hanging out together, and the like palace has created these spaces for them, but September has to basically go it alone, right? She has to go
yeah,
off and learn the rules and get dressed and all of this stuff all by herself. So there's always that moment. She always has at least one of those moments, at least one in every book where it's just September and September
yeah,
has to kind of figure it out. But she always does. And so you're
yes.
always like, my girl, my sweet
And I
girl.
love that her solutions play on her strengths, but they also are so often they connect to other people as well. Like the way we were talking about how the resolution of this book and how like love is so important, it doesn't feel cheap and it feels earned. And that's, I feel like that's the perfect balance of like September making her own decisions and doing things and being active, and then also her solutions lead back to other people too. Like I
Yes.
love that.
Yeah.
Gets me in my feelings.
I think also
um
there's a really good sense of her like growing up here in terms of like when we first meet her, she like gets up on the leopard and she doesn't even look backwards. And like the story in the first book reminds us a few times, like she hasn't even thought about her mom, like she's just
mhm,
like off
mhm.
on her adventure. And here, when she gets to a moment where she can like the first thing she wants is like, I want my old dress, I want my old car, I want my old shoes, like I want everything that she could of comfort that she could hold on to. And multiple times she thinks, but my parents, like what if I never see them again? And like I miss them, I miss my dad's voice, I miss this. So like that sense of like nostalgia almost like is something that 12-year-old September did not have an ounce of, but that you don't have at 12 years old. What nostalgia do you have at 12
Yeah,
years
yeah.
old?
You're still in the nostalgia time.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
But now we see
Yeah.
almost adult September in this book, and she's like, childhood.
Yeah.
And I'm
Yeah.
like, yeah, girl, that only gets worse.
Yes. Yes. And like that contrasts like her division of how she feels about this. It's like such a contrast with Saturday. At least like before he starts losing his memories. Like, cause over and over again, he's like, if we win, then she will stay.
Yeah.
And I like felt for him so much because I totally understand. But then when we're following September, she's like she doesn't know what she wants, because either way she's going to lose something and some people that she loves.
Mm.
um yeah. And actually that segues into I think my last kind of character question. So September's family actually comes to Fairyland, and we know from the last book and from this one that her Aunt Margaret has actually been there before. um and what do you think, like why do you think Valenti like had them come into Fairyland just like in this last book? Like, why do you think she made that part of the story rather than just having them get brought to the Fairyland by magic at the ending? Or, like, why did she choose to do it this way? I guess because I
Mm.
have some thoughts on it.
Okay, you share your thoughts. I don't know if I've given
Okay.
it thought, so.
So I feel like one of the things that accomplishes is it plays into this idea of like everybody having their own story that they are the hero of. And we actually get that said specifically about September's parents, because the narrator says like one of the hardest things for children is to realize that they're adults, like the adults in their life, their parents, are like having like are also having adventures, are also doing interesting things at the same time that they are. And I feel like this kind of goes into what we said in the other books, where the human world is still, it still has people that we care about and that matter. And I feel like it's very easy in stories like this to, I mean, I, speaking for myself at least, I pretty much am always like, yeah, stay in Fairyland. Like try and get the people you care about to be there too. But it's like, I feel like having her family have even just the small role in the story that they do, it softens a little bit. Like I'm struggling to explain it. I have like a very clear idea of how it made me feel, and I'm having a hard time articulating it, but I really loved it. I love that we see that the relationships she has back home are still important to her, and that Fairyland can be for everyone. I think that's one of the things too that it says to me, the way that Valenti did it this way. So yeah, I really love that, and I love that we didn't waste time with the adults like, this can't be real, this is a fairy tale. It's like not wasting any time on that. I love that. So I just really, really appreciated it, and I feel like it comes back to like the story respecting all of its characters. And I love September's parents like as their own characters too, and her aunt as her own character. It's like they feel fully fleshed out. They're not just there to like cause conflict for September. So it just made the whole ending, I think, mean so much more. So
yeah,
that was like an incredibly rambling monologue on my feelings for this.
I think I think you nailed it, especially because thinking about it, there were other lines from the narrator about like this idea of like everybody has their story and everybody's story is like important and they are the own heroes of their own story, especially because we get all of these rulers that come back, right? And I think specifically what the narrator says is something about the Marquess, and where she's like, oh gosh, it's something like, you know, but that's her story. And she wakes her up, even though she was gonna like sleep late and like miss the whole thing. And the narrator says that she like sneaks into her room and like wakes her up, and she's like, I know you're wondering why I did that, but everyone has their story, and I'm like running multiple stories, so I have to like, you know, I have to play it fair. Like I got to do what I got to do. So this idea, right, that everybody does have their adventures and have their stories, and you know, we might not see the whole of it or the full of it, but like recognizing that in somebody else is important. So I think that that's a neat piece of like also including Aunt Margaret in there, where she's like, I've never been to Paris.
She's like, I'm gonna get the money to go to Paris. No, it's like Hannah says, I want a whole book about Aunt Margaret. Yes, like
there's a short story.
Ooh, okay.
There is a short story where let me see if I can find the title of this. I've never read it, but you do follow Aunt Margaret. Fairyland. I will look it up.
Okay.
Maybe. All right. If I can't find it, I will. If I can find it, I'll let you guys know.
Okay, cool. Yeah, any other thoughts from the comment section on any of these characters or things we've been talking about? I think the rest of my questions are mainly like theme focused. So if we have anything else we want to chat about with characters, we can do that now. Yeah.
I don't think so.
Okay. So we talked about this a little bit already, but the heart of Fairyland being a story, obviously big moment, very thematic. And we've talked a little bit about this already. But I specifically wanted to ask, like, this is a very meta series in the way that it's narrated. Like the narrator is such a present character. We interact with them so often. So how do you think the heart of Fairyland being a story, like that is within the story, but then also us reading the story? I don't know. It's very complicated to like ask questions about this part, but any thoughts? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think, you know, the story, the narrator has always been a character, and I feel like we've always been treated as part of the story as well because of the way that the narrator speaks to us, and like, you know, the way that the story has been communicated has always been like, hey, come here, like, let me tell you something, you know, like the world is a house. And I don't know, we've just been so central to the entire experience. So I think that that idea very, it is very like meta in terms of like, it's a story, we're reading a story, we're the readers, like we're
Yes.
part of the heart of Fairyland, like in a way that is just like very, very cute.
Yes. Yes. And I actually, so we talk a lot about like growing up as being like another kind of central part of the series. And I feel like with this last book, not that it wasn't as much of a focus, but it felt different to me. It's kind of like September is like simultaneously realizing that she is growing up and that she's never going to feel grown up.
Yeah.
And to me, that feels like a little bit of a shift from previous books. So I didn't really have like a question associated with that, but if we like wanted to chat about that at all, I don't know. It's just, it's so interesting. There's that line from the narrator where he's like, the last part of growing up is realizing that you'll never feel grown up or something. Like he says, like, you never feel so grown up as when you're 12 years old. And I'm like, yes, like that is exactly like I really connected with that. It's like once you're a real adult, you're like, I am baby. I know nothing. Like,
Yes, absolutely. And I think that ultimately, I don't think that there is like a like final thing that this says about growing up, except for like, I don't know, growing up is messy. And there
it's a
have been
mess. Yeah.
things that like, there are times that September has felt like the most grown person in the world, and there are times that she's felt like baby, and there are times that she's looked young and times that she's looked old, and times that she's felt young and times that she's felt old, and like it's all just a jumble of watching her
Yeah.
grow up. And in the end, like truly it's like
Yeah.
actually in the end, the real thing is that time is mean, and time like
Yes.
whether we want to or not, like time kind of marches on, and we're gonna have all of these different experiences of like when we feel grown up and when we don't, and when we feel like we fit and we figured it out and when we don't, and that's kind of all that there is to
Yeah.
it. So yes.
And I feel like Saturday being a merid, he like kind of literalizes that, you know, in just like a really interesting way. Um, yeah. This is, I guess, more of like a plot adjacent question. I should have asked this earlier, but um, how did you feel about having the race as like the main plot structure for this book? Like, it's unusually structured in a way. Like I feel like this is one of the books that has a more concrete, like,
Mhm.
this is the story, this is where we're going. So I don't know if you had opinions on that.
I think I noticed it when I was like thinking about how at the end we always read quotes, and this is my least quoted book. Like I love it.
Oh,
This is the book where I have the least amount of quotes highlighted, and I think that that is because like in a lot of the other books, for so long, for so much of it, we're just kind of like, I don't know about the plot, and we're just like thinking and feeling and having all of these. But this, I mean, it has really beautiful writing still, but a lot of it is more description and like getting us from point A to point B, and like here's what we're doing. So that it feels like there's less to me, like moments where I can just like highlight this passage about time and love and the beauty of life, where it's more just like, here's who we're meeting, here's where we're at, here's this adventure that we're on. And that's not a bad thing, but I think that that's what made me realize, oh, like this actually has such a structured plot compared to like everything else that we've read so far that has felt
yeah,
more sort of ambling.
yeah,
And I think because it is a competition, like even before where there was a destination, a lot of the decision making was like September going like, I don't know, man, on adventures, you go this way. So I'm going to go this way, where this felt a lot more like strategically, like figuring out, okay, where should we go next? So it
yeah,
felt more structured and like there was more urgency there.
yeah. I actually, in a way, I'm surprised at how much I loved having that as a central plot because, as we discussed way back in book one, I'm not like a road trip kind of book person. Like, that's not, I don't like traveling in books for long periods. And this one is basically like that. But I really liked it. I think for me it it kind of forced a balance in the story between the themes and the characters and like the plot or settings in a way that I think really worked. Like it reminded me actually a little bit of the first book, where even though there were parts of the journey where I'm like, okay, we're kind of just wandering from place to place, but then we would get to one of the places and I'm like, oh, but I love this. And I feel like this last book had an even better balance with that, which I mean, I love these long thematic passages as well, but I think there was something extra impressive to me about having shorter thematic quotes in between all of the character stuff and like pulling in these elements from the other books in this series. Like it felt like the themes almost meant more to me because they were connected to these characters more directly. Let's see. Hannah says, I think that's kind of always the way with finales. It just has so much plot to wrap up.
Yes.
Yeah. And we did have a couple of like wacky tangents. Like the vole was an interesting one. Like, but in general, it felt like more of a focused plot, which was an interesting change. Okay. And kind of along with that, I guess we could talk about this maybe after we finish themes, but just be thinking about any particularly memorable scenes or places, because I think that would be a fun thing to discuss. Okay, I am trying to read my own handwriting. Okay, another kind of big thematic question, which I think is my last one before we get into kind of like the ending specifically. How do you feel Fairyland is portrayed overall in this book compared to the other books, like in terms of how dark it is or how dangerous it is or how whimsical it is? Like we've seen that kind of dichotomy for Fairyland a lot in the other books in the series, and I wanted to know if you think that felt different here.
I think in general there is a sort of whimsy to this story, but I don't think that we totally get away from like the darkness of Fairyland, or like I don't know. There is a way that like Fairyland is still like sort of romanticized, almost literally so in this book, where they talk about how like the ruler has to marry Fairyland, and like that is like a relationship between monarch and place or whatnot. But it doesn't fully go there in terms of being like Fairyland's a great place, because you hear so often all that is required of that person, of like the burden of keeping Fairyland like and satisfying all of its needs is like a terrible thing, which is how we get into the situation in the first place, is that Charlie French Crab is like, no more, like this is you know. I think there's still that sense, and I think that there's also still that sense in terms of like, you know, the end I think is a little bittersweet in terms of like seeing Fairyland, or seeing September grab a kid and bring them to Fairyland. It is very much like the story goes on or whatever, but it's still like Fairyland is going to keep bringing people here. And there is this sort of like inherent heartbreak in that, because they can't stay, right? There is always going to be the cycle of like heartbreak and of like terrible things happen here, wonderful things and terrible things. So I think that we still very much get the sense of like Fairyland as a force, as sort of this unyielding force of like it's got to do what it's got to do, and that is whether you're there or not. It kind of you have to work around Fairyland and not the other way around. So
I feel like overall for me it felt like there was less discussion of kind of the dark side of Fairyland, because more of this book I think was focused on September being like, I want to fight for it though, you know, like there are all these problems and it is dangerous and I'm not happy here all the time, but I know I want to fight for it. I don't know how much I want to be involved, but I know that there is something worth fighting for here. And so I think that kind of, to me, it felt like less of an obvious emphasis on how selfish Fairyland can be and how dark it can be. But then there are those parts, like we talked about the ending and how like, yeah, like September, it is sad because she was so she was so against what Fairyland does to its children.
Mhm.
And now she has kind of been forced into doing that as well. And yeah, and then I also think that seeing so many of the other rulers, I think, is another kind of way we get a glimpse of what Fairyland is like. Because, like, basically all of them, I'm like, so, like, all of the rulers of Fairyland sucked. Like, once in a while, like, there was maybe, like, one or two that they mentioned who were not tyrants.
Yes.
Which I think also probably is intentional. I'm maybe Valenti is saying something about power and
Yes.
corruption.
Power makes tyrants of everyone.
Yes, yes. So I guess with those two big exceptions, overall this book felt like there was less of an emphasis on it, but more because, like, I feel like we already know. We already know what Fairyland is like. We know that it is not
Yes.
as pretty as it looks, and so we're kind of accepting that. We know that from the previous books, and then the decision in this last book is like September, and the reader is like, okay, but I still love it. What am I going to do about that?
Yeah.
So
I think too that by bringing all the rulers back, there is like sort of like you take some blame off of Fairyland when you realize that all of these people really suck too, and like a lot of, like, I don't know, sort of the rules and the things that chafe in Fairyland were these people trying to keep Fairyland for themselves or trying to decide who Fairyland belongs to. So a lot of that messaging of like power corrupts and like people in power are to blame as well. I think was present, which helps temper like the darkness of Fairyland, right? There is something
yes.
very sort of like, I don't know, mathematical or sort of like, I don't know, impersonal about Fairyland's sort of darkness. It feels very much like you take a child, you give a child. Like Fairyland's like, I don't know, that's the balance sort of thing. There's like some like impersonal nature there, but there is something incredibly personal about all of the way that these monarchs were like people in cages and like all of the
Yeah.
other awful things that they did. So I think in the comparison, Fairyland comes out looking great.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think like there is something, like you were saying, Fairyland is almost impersonal feeling in a way that, like, it's not cruel because it's not doing it on purpose. Like, that doesn't change the fact that it is doing these things, but at least with Fairyland, it's not like an individual person who is deliberately choosing something that is like for selfish reasons. It's like Fairyland is kind of, it just doesn't operate with the same like moral code as anyone else, which is not to absolve the entity of like responsibility, but it's different. Yeah. So also very, I think, connected to the themes we've been talking about, but like, let's talk about the ending. We did a little bit already. We both loved it. I just, yeah, like I didn't have a specific idea of what I thought would happen or what I wanted to happen, but I knew that I didn't want September to be locked out of Fairyland forever, but
Yes.
I also didn't want her to be cut off from her family forever. And
Yes.
so with those things in mind, I'm like, beautiful. This is like, it feels so perfect. And the fact that we had a callback to the very first book and the very first time she talks to the Green Wind and he's telling her how the winds get like defeated and how they change people. Like, I had forgotten that was even a conversation, and then the way it gets brought back at the ending of this one is so beautiful. Like that moment where September like meets her death again,
Yeah.
and she's like, oh, she's old or she's huge.
Yeah. Yeah.
And anyway, this is just me having feelings again, so there's no question in here. Just like, do you have
That was like I didn't want September to be locked out. I wanted September to also be with her family, like both families, her Fairyland family and her other family. And we knew like, September and Saturday have a child at some point. So there was that like whole like that has to happen kind of thing.
yeah
And I will admit that the first time I was reading, I was like, okay, it's Queen September, long live Queen. Like I was like, yeah, she has to be queen. I think I was so stuck on sort of the injustice of it that even though she was like, I don't want this, I was like, this is not fair that she
Yeah.
only gets to be queen for a few days and she has to go through all of this other stuff to like maintain the crown. I was like, no, Queen September. But when we got to the end and it was Wind September, I was like, okay, no, Catherine, you're right. I was wrong. This is actually who September is meant to be. 100%.
Yeah.
100%
Yeah.
who September is meant to be. Especially because I love that she like throughout this whole thing we've been meeting winds and she's been interacting with them and like either befriending them or besting them. I love that, you know, she who blushes first, you know, that whole thing comes back around, like, so it just felt really, really like full circle to me to have her reach that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I loved Saturday's ending as well, and how that felt so like balanced with hers. Like I definitely thought she'd end up like her aunt, but I love how it wrapped up so differently than I expected. The green jacket was always hers. I love it.
Perfect. It was perfect. It was such a good ending. It was really all of my character, like every character really ended in a place where I was like happy for them.
Yes, and it still felt earned. Like I think one of the reasons that some adult readers complain about like happy endings or just endings where like more good things happen than not is that there's this feeling that those can't have a cost, you know, they can't be earned, they can't be struggled for, but they are. Like we have seen September go through so much. All of these characters go through so much. It's like I will fight anybody who's like, yeah, but it's a little too easy for her. And I'm like, no. I mean, she
Mhm.
literally she throws herself in front of her friend to save
Yeah.
his life. And
Yeah.
also it's like the fact too that like I would have maybe assumed that the wind was like immortal or something, you know, because like they feel like that kind of not really human, like almost like demigod sort of thing.
Mhm.
And she didn't even think about it. Like anyway, I
Yeah.
love the ending. Can you
I
tell?
I think there was also like it felt right because as much as September was like, I do not want to be queen, like everybody kept telling her, like, are you kidding? Like basically, like you're meant for some kind of power. You got
Yeah.
in here and you started messing things up immediately. Like you got in here, you charged for the most powerful person immediately. And in every bit of her story, that's what she like ever had to play, that she had like some power to wield. Wind felt really, really satisfying.
Yes. And something else I love about it is it feels like, in a way, now September gets to rest, finally. Like
Yes.
after all of the revolutions and the deposings and like all of the like I mean, we talk about how every time she comes back, she's like, "Can I have like a fun adventure now?" And they're like, "No." And I feel like she finally has gotten her fun adventure. Like obviously she's still going to get involved with all the messy stuff, but
And
it
there
feels like yeah.
sorry.
No, I was basically that. I was just like, it feels like she gets to like rest, and I'm so happy for her.
Yeah. And there's some like rules that she has to follow, but this feels
Yeah.
like a way that she can also make a ton of her own rules. Like the
Yeah.
winds have always felt like very rebellious and irreverent and like
They're so chaotic. It
they're
fits her
very
perfectly.
perfect for her. The reason that like the whole queendom thing would have rankled for September because of the rules, not because she cannot like kind of bear the power or she's not
Yep.
good or she wouldn't want to do good. The rules would have gotten to her. And so this is like the best of both worlds. She can be a little chaos monster. And we love that for her.
Yes, we do. I also really love how one of the feelings I get from the ending is, again, with the things that like when you say them, they sound sappy, but they don't feel sappy when you're reading them, is
Yes.
like the people you love are home. Like I love that so much. Like I love that the reason that September can finally like settle in Fairyland is because now she has like both her families with her. Like I just thought that was so beautiful. I love that we didn't just brush off the fact that like her parents love her and her aunt loves her, and so like what, because she wants to have an adventure, we're not supposed to care that they have lost like this person they love. So I really love that like how that kind of connects to the idea of like somebody's heart and a place that feels like home, and how it's like the people you love.
Yeah.
Let's see. I think. Okay, do we want to talk about any particular like scenes or moments? Also, I guess like one of the most important questions, did we cry? Did we cry at the end?
I did. I mean, I didn't cry at the end. And I wouldn't say I ever like sobbed. I
Right.
was tabbing things up, and the blue are like moments where I was like tears in my eyes.
Yes.
So
Yes.
definitely had a few moments where it was like, oh, like, and two of these are basically just lines. That one was from
Mhm.
L and one was from September. L is basically saying, like, when she leaves L and Blunderbuss, and she says, "Please be back, like, please be here when I get back." And he's like, "September, I'm always here when." And I was like, "Get out of!" He always finds her.
I know.
Go away. And then the other one was, um, Saturday is asking to go to the sea. And he's like, but I don't know if this is right. I don't know if this is me being homesick or if it's like the right thing to do. And he smiles at her. And September says, Death herself could not say no when Saturday smiled, crying, crying, crying,
Yep.
crying.
Yep. I marked that quote as well. I think the one that got me the most, and this surprised me, because there were lots of moments that I was very emotional and I kind of got like choked up, but the one that was like clearly like, okay, tears in my eyes, one might have actually rolled down my face, was right at the end, the scene with the narrator, and where the narrator is like this like cozy little house, and that you can just like feel at home here, and it's like, I will always be here for you when you're ready to come back. And I'm just like, I don't know why that's the one that just like absolutely
Yeah.
like ugh, it
Yeah.
was so good. It's like, and it made me think about like the whole series and how like
That's
it's such a like a moment that is very very meta in the way that it like makes me think about like the process of reading these books and how like these books are always going to be there for me, and just like it was so beautiful. I don't even know, like I don't think I even took a picture of a quote because it was that like entire section where I'm just like, this is one of the most beautiful things I've ever read. I just need to like lie on the floor and have a moment. Like I can't handle it. Where is it? Let's see. Like I really do think I just gave up on taking a quote because I'm like, this whole thing.
I also towards the end was like, okay, all of it is giving me feelings. The other one where I marked also tears in my eyes was when September figures out that the heart of Fairyland is a story, and she's saying a story over Saturday. And the narrator tells us, like, I'm going to give them this moment because there are things that like lovers say to each other that are just for them. And so like she told him their story, and then she like puts her head down on him, and I was like, stop it, my beautiful children, stop it right now.
Okay. I'm gonna try to read this quote without just like crying live on the internet, but no promises. I will always be here in my old chair by the door, waiting for you whenever you are lonesome. Our little house will always look just the same as when we first blew the dust off the bookshelves, and the kettle will always be just about to boil. Sometimes I will be young, and sometimes I will be old, and sometimes you will be young, and sometimes you will be old. But for as long as forever, I will keep a room for you. I swear by the sparkle in my eye and the spring in your step. It is time to start the feast. We have lit a fire in the hearth and put the kettle on. Company is coming after all, and we have waited so long to see them smile. I just like that is like one of the most beautiful scenes I have ever read in my life. Catherine, like,
Yes, it is this like of all of the things that this like story is full of, the series, like love of stories is like up there, right? Love of life
yeah,
in ways like seeing us off was very much like one reader to another, like, you know, this story will always be here, you know, in a way that was like, stop
yeah,
it. I will be back.
I know. Yes, I love this one. Like from Saturday, she would stay and he would never have to turn to say something to her and find no one there ever again.
Mhm. Yeah, his whole thing throughout where he's like, okay, but stay, okay, but you, like, heartbreaking.
I know.
Absolutely.
And when he like forgets, he's like, "Oh, what am I supposed to remember? Like if we win, who can stay?" And I'm like, "No."
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Also, just like as a side note about Saturday, I think this series does such a good job of writing this like really deep and complicated relationship between these characters in a way that grows as the books do, because like there's some authors who like try to write this for middle grade and I'm like, this feels weird. But I feel like here it didn't. It was like very, it like
Age
fit the,
appropriate.
yes, exactly, it like fit the ages of the characters and it fit where they were at in the story. And so by the end, it's like, yeah, it doesn't feel weird to have this like love story as part of it. um I know some people feel it's overkill to reference stories and reading in books, but it will get me every time. Listen, like so many people complain about Northanger Abbey. They're like they say that like, oh, you can tell it's one of like it's her first novel she wrote because there's the part where you just stop the story to have a monologue about the importance of novels, and I'm like, that's one of my favorite parts. Like, don't don't threaten me with a good time. Like, I love it.
I'm very hit or miss with those things because they can feel very on the nose and very
Yes.
like, what's up, fellow readers, in a way
Yeah.
that feels cheesy to me. And it's like, okay, calm down. So that is a thing like that is hit or miss for me. But when somebody like truly earnestly captures like the magic of story and storytelling, like, yeah, I'm a goner.
Yep.
And this did
Yep.
as well. This never felt like, what's up, fellow readers? This felt
Yeah.
like a love letter from somebody who loves fairy tales. And
Yes.
so
Yes.
that's why it worked.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like I should have had a poll going on how likely we thought I would cry or like where it would happen or how many times, because I'm still just like wiping tears away. It's
It
just so beautiful.
was just so
Like I honestly like I can't remember the last time I read a series ender that was like this like fulfilling and beautiful, and like my heart just feels so full. Like
yeah.
I can't get over it.
Yes, it's beautiful. I also, you know, I mentioned that I was like so sad to like leave the series, and I still feel that way. Like if there were a ton more books, by the way, I was wrong about the short story. I thought that the short story was about Margaret, but it's about Mallow, Good Queen Mallow. Uh,
Oh,
and so
interesting.
I have a vague feeling. There's also like another short story about the narrator that might be out of print now. I vague memory in one of the short stories about Fairyland that maybe Margaret makes like has a cameo or something like that. That feels right, but I don't know 100%. The short story about Good Queen Mallow is called "The Girl Who Ruled Fairyland for a Little While."
Okay.
So,
Interesting.
I don't know where that tangent came from, where I was going before that, but now you have that information.
No, I love it. I love it. Um, yeah, I think it's obvious. I'm very glad we did this. I love this series so much. And like this ending is so good that it like elevates the whole series for me. Like I was already enjoying it. There were already like books in the series that I loved, but like this last one, man, I just like I can't deal.
Yeah. I there's a like a trend on TikTok about like books where like you won't hear any sort of criticism about them. Like I will not be hearing any. And I'm working on a video where it's like I will hear criticism even about my favorite books, but there are certain criticisms that I will not abide, like specific criticisms. Like for Pride and Prejudice, when people say like this is just about a book about visiting people, fucking hate it. Like, that's such
Yeah.
a cheap criticism. Let that one die. Let that joke die. For this one, I think that everyone that I've seen that doesn't like it, like, says something about how it's like too flowery. And I think at one point I was like, oh, I see that. But now I'm like, you're wrong. I I don't know. I feel like, I mean, I don't know. Maybe it's because you have to get to the end to really appreciate the way that like everything comes together. And when you're sitting in some of those beginning moments, it does feel a little ambling and rambly, sort of under the weight of like the language and all of that. But I don't know. I think that
No.
I think that this is not too flowery. I think that it is efficient with its words. I think that everything feels really purposeful. I think that like Valenti isn't just being flowery for the sake of it. Like, she's
Yeah.
always saying something or she's
Yeah.
always doing something. So it's not like one of those books that I read that I'm like, you just wasted like 10 words where one would do. Every
Mhm.
word in this, I'm like, delicious.
Yeah.
I would eat it up again. And I did,
Yes.
obviously.
I also like, yeah, I would disagree with the same criticism. I don't think this last book felt overdone at all, like in any capacity. I can see that argument for the first book. Like, I feel like it takes a little bit for the series to hit its stride. And then I think with the third one, we both kind of discussed the like, where even are, like, even by the standards of this series, like, what is going on?
Yeah.
But for the rest of the series, and I think especially for this last book, I think, like you said, she is so intentional with
Yes.
her metaphors and with her descriptions, and they are not there for no reason. I don't ever like, I don't get the feeling that she's just like showing off, and it's like, yeah, those words sound good together, but I have no idea what you're like, what this even means, or like where we are. um I feel like this book really exemplifies that, like, Catherine and Valenti, she has a very particular flavor, but she knows what she's doing with it. Like, barring the beginning of the series and kind of like that third book in the middle, I feel like that's where it got away from her a little bit. But in terms of this last book, I'm like, no notes, like, just
And
10 out of 10, would cry again, like.
cry every time. I think
Yeah.
even with like the like that book, which I think plotting wise is the weakest, there's still like even a moment of like bringing it all home, or like its function
Yes.
within the like full arc.
Yeah.
I think it still has one, because like the Yeti paw is what makes her old, and the passage of time, and like even just the idea that the whole problem with the moon was that it was having a baby. I'm like, it just goes along with this entire idea of like Fairyland as a person, and Fairyland
Yeah.
experiencing things, and like love at the heart of everything. I don't know. It
Yeah.
still fits in a way that I'm like, even the weakest part of this, like,
Yes.
has a purpose.
It accomplishes something.
And it
Yeah.
accomplished something. Yes.
Yeah. And I also like, going off of what you were saying with like the personification of Fairyland, I feel like that also contributes to another kind of big idea of this whole series, which is like, people are not objects and should never be treated as objects. And people meaning like any people, like the discussion of like being a steed here.
Yes.
It's like it's a funny thing. It's kind of a recurring joke, but it's also very genuine, because it's like, yeah, Blunderbuss is like a full person. She is like fully like sentient and in charge, and like she is choosing to help her friends by letting them ride on her back. It's like, that's not like, I feel like that discussion in this book was like a fun callback, but it also still felt real, because it's like, yeah, like she is capable of choices. Like, A through L is like his own person. So I feel like that, plus like the fairies being literally turned into objects by Margaret, because
Yes.
because they were treating others like objects. I just think like that was beautiful too.
Yeah. I also I think that we were talking about like the darkness of Fairyland or whatever. I do love that sort of consistently throughout, with one or two exceptions. The Fae have been portrayed as like not great.
Yes.
And like the entire idea of like who Fairyland belongs to and treating people as objects, like even here, part of the reason that the old Charlie wants to get off the throne is that everybody is like bemoaning that he's like being too nice. And like,
Yeah.
remember, everyone's like, remember when we had a tyrant? Like he
The
really,
good old days. Like,
yeah,
yeah.
he put people in their place. So, with a couple of exceptions that we saw, like Calpurnia, people who Fae who were doing okay. Generally, I really like that this committed to the idea of the Fae as like not great.
Me too. Like that's something I really love, is that more kind of like old world, like you don't mess with them.
Yes,
Like
yes,
I mean, even like the brief glimpse that we get here of Queen Mab, like
yeah,
she's tiny, but she is terrifying.
yeah.
Like and September is like, oh my god, I really don't want to mess with her. Like yeah, I really liked that as well. Like that kind of, like they're interesting and they're strange, but
Mhm.
they're also scary. Like you do not cross them.
Yeah.
And Elisa said, I read the last 3 books on a camping trip, and it was a good place to have lots of time to process my big feelings. Yeah. Yep.
These feel like good in nature books.
Mm-hmm.
Enjoy
I was so happy we got that little bit back in the autumn
Yes,
setting with like,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'm just like having a moment over here. Do we want to move into quotes?
Send it off with some quotes.
All right. I think I also didn't take as many for this one, but I think I have more like memorable scenes, I guess. I think like one thing about this book is like every single like side quest or every single like moment or scene or new location, I'm like, this is good. This is quality. Like, which like I enjoyed a lot of the locations in the other books and a lot of the kind of side quests. But this is, I feel like this novel, it's like there's none that I'm like, oh, this was kind of a drag, or like this we could have cut or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay. So my first one.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, it is always easier to fight the powerful than to wield power yourself. And that is the last lesson of childhood. You spend all your years fighting against the injustice of big folk and their big rules until you are ready to rule yourself.
That is literally my first one as well.
Yes! Same wavelength. Yeah, and this one you were talking about earlier, where like Hawthorne is like, you don't understand what it's like to be a changeling. And it's like, okay, I get it, but also, yes, do you want to read it? Do you want to read it?
That's literally my second one. Okay.
Go for it.
We're sorry, September, Tam began. It's only that we're changelings. If only changelings were in charge, nobody else would ever have to get kidnapped just to make the math work out. We think you'd be a lovely queen, but we can't trust anyone who hasn't had to grow up in the human world. I grew up in the human world, September said crossly. It's not the same, Hawthorne sighed. You don't know what it's like to always feel like you don't belong to your family, to your city, or your school. Knowing there's something different about you, something off, that you're not like the others, that you're an alien all alone. September crossed her arms. Hawthorne, everyone feels like that. But the troll shook his head. You were human. You matched. You didn't know you don't know what it's like to be stuck. Listen to September. Max could tell you too, and Thomas Rood, and Penny Farthing, and even the boy named Humphrey who carved his name in your desk. You could tell him, and so could I. No one belongs when they are new to this world. All children are changelings.
All children are changelings. And that like also, passing. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Maybe you were going to say the same thing, but I also love that usually the narrator is like, oh, September, like, you know nothing. And in this one, she's like, oh, Hawthorne, listen to September. Like, yes. She's got it. Like, she figured it out. I was like,
I also love even that passing reference to like even the boy named Humphrey who carved his name in your desk. Like that is one of the things that I just so consistently love about these books, is that like everybody matters, and not everybody is like deeply involved in this particular story, but it's like there's no there's like a respect for
Yeah.
other people as being interesting and
Yes.
being valued, and I just love it. Um, Speaking of Darling September,
Mhm.
my next one is perhaps I could bring my parents through the closet between the worlds, and we could all be together here. Halloween brought my father to Fairyland below, and she's only my shadow. You're allowed to do that sort of thing when you're queen. Darling September, that is why anyone wants to rule. Oh, they would never admit it, but at the bottom of their hearts, anyone who longs for power longs to have everyone and everything they love safe and happy forever in one place, no matter the cost. It's only what happens to those they do not love that makes it all go wrong-headed and hard.
Mhm. Ah! All right. I mentioned this one before about time being mean, so this is my next one. I don't know why you need to be quite so mean, Saturday scowled defensively. The brass ball grew serious and quiet. All time is mean, young man. It takes and does not give. It rushes when you wish it would linger and drags when you wish it would fly. It flows sullenly only in one direction when it might take 1,000 turns. You cannot get anything back. It takes and steals and lies and kills. If anyone could arrest it, they would have time behind bars faster than you can check your watch. True.
Yep. And this is the one of them I was talking about earlier. You never feel so grown up as when you are 11, and never so young and unsure as when you are 40. Like, I just feel that hard. Like, the older I get.
The more I'm like, I'm just a baby.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, Parents never quite take the same path as their children through any country at all. This is good and right and proper, though it does make for heated arguments on holidays.
Yeah. Um, this one actually is much later in the book, but it's very similar to my last one. One of the awful secrets of 17 is that it still has 7 hiding inside it. Sometimes 7 comes tumbling out, even when 17 wants to be grown up and proud. This is also one of the awful secrets of 70.
This is also later on in the book, and this is my last one that I highlighted. That's all right, my girl. Don't fret. Power is a coat that's always too small. It takes time to wear it in, to feel like it's really yours, to fill up the pockets with your own lint and house keys and slips of right and wrong with cat's fur hanging off them. And for people with hearts as quick and raw and hungry as September's, the coat will never fit quite right. That's why she would make the best and worst queen.
I know, I know. Oh, I thought this one was like really funny and satisfying. I don't care for gossip, began September hesitantly. Oh, come now, Maud said, laughing. You know it's only called gossip when girls do it. We mean to parlay. It's like, it's so true. Like, tell them, Maud.
Or, girl, I'm gonna start using that instead of being like, I have a secret. I'm like, we need to parlay.
We need to parlay. Yeah.
No more gossip sessions. We're gonna parlay, girls.
Exactly. Exactly. She felt quite herself again. Such feelings rarely last long, for the meaning of oneself changes as quick as clouds skipping. For that's all a story is, my dears, a knife that cuts the world into pieces small enough to eat. Yeah, another good story one.
Mm-hmm.
We meet many times as we grow up and become different and new and exciting people. Yep. And I already read my favorite one. Crying on camera.
Yay!
We all knew it would happen, probably. But
It was a beautiful journey.
it was. I feel so full of love and just joy and satisfaction. And I am so excited to like throw this book at the next person
Yes.
who says something disparaging about middle grade or, like.
We now can all preach the good news of the Fairyland series to the
Yes.
unbelievers.
Yes, we can. We can. I'm gonna do a review on this series. Like, I am so excited to talk about it.
Yes.
So good. So good. So any last thoughts on the book before we wrap things up? Let's see.
Don't think so.
What a fabulous series ender this was.
Mhm.
Thank you so much, Mari, for doing this with me. I'm so excited I finally read these books. Yeah, and like I said, our wrap up kind of discussion for this series where we're just gonna talk about it as a whole and talk about, you know, like ranking the books and some like fun, any kind of like fun or interesting questions or like favorites, least favorites, anything like that. We are planning that for May 7th, which is a Sunday. And the time we have is 4 p.m. Pacific time, 7 p.m. Eastern. So that's in just about a week. And yes, now how do we force Catherine to write more short stories, novellas about other side characters? If you figure it out, let me know. We can all send her a very sternly worded letter.
We love you. Give it now.
Yes. Very aggressively supportive. Yeah, anything to add, Muddy?
Nope, that's it.
All right, everyone. So we will hopefully see you in a week. Thank you guys so much for chatting with us, reading along with us. Thank you to everybody who watches these back later. I obviously had a wonderful time. And I was right. This was a great way to start the project. So I am planning to do a short announcement soon to talk about the next books and the next guests that I'll have for the Not a Genre Book Club. So keep an eye out for that. We're working out some final kind of scheduling things, but we have more good things to come. And so happy to start off with this series. I just have a lot of feelings.
We have one more to like get all the feelings
out. Yes, we'll be ready. So we will see you guys then.
All right,
bye.